Welcome to the Paleo Post Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of Paleoanthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with leading experts, the Paleo Post Podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together.
And we are back for the third episode of the Paleo Post Podcast, Season 3. We are so excited to be here today. I am joined by the wonderful Genevieve von Petzinger. Today, George is off doing some amazing, wonderful things around the globe, so he is not joining us for this episode. We will miss him, but we're going to have a great conversation, and we have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. First, we're going to start with some updates about the world of paleoanthropology. As some of you may know, we are trying to expand and become more of a science communication presence in the larger field of anthropology and science communication. And the first step in doing that is building a dedicated team of people who not only are enthusiastic, knowledgeable, and want to change how things are, but just they want to help out. Right now, it's a volunteer basis. We are in the process of writing grants, and if paid positions become available, that's something that can be talked about later. So that's the hope that people will get compensated. Right now it is volunteer basis, and we have a form that you can fill out that will be in the description that can help place you in what department, because we've split things up, in where you would fit the best based on your interests and how you want to help, what type of anthropology you like, biological, cultural, if you're a social media person, if you're a writer. We want to know where your strengths are so we can use them to best make the world of paleoanthropology what it can be, if that makes sense. New father here, still struggling to sleep. We're going. Okay.
You're like words, working on words.
Words. So there is an application form. It is a little lengthy, but we want to get to know you, and please fill that out if you're interested. You can find that on social media or in the descriptions of this podcast or video. That's about it for updates on the world of paleoanthropology. You know, we're constantly updating news, striving to be better every day in what we do, and we want you to become a part of that. So let's do some amazing things together. And then I hear you've got some updates or news that you'd like to share. Yes. So why don't we start there?
Yes, always fun. Well, first of all, hi again. And yes, and shout out to George. I think he was on a plane, and I think now he's on the train, like for real.
It was kind of funny. I left him a voice. I left him a voice message. I'm like, George, I blah, 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 blah. Wait, are you on a train? No, you're on a plane. No, wait, are you on a ferry?
Yeah.
So I'm like, is he coming over? Like, no, yeah, but...
so he started on a plane, I think, this morning, and then he was on a train recently, and then there probably will also be an automobile, just to have the planes and trains and automobiles. I think he's really having a day with all three. So shout out to George. We miss him, but you know, that's how it works, right? Sometimes somebody's off having adventures. So I'm pretty sure we can talk enough to fill the space.
If any of you missed season 1, Genevieve and I talk a lot. So enjoy the ride.
Okay, we're doing okay. But no, I just want to say, so I had a really fun week, actually. I was doing an updated project with National Geographic Learning. So they do textbooks and things around the world. And it is an absolute privilege and an honor that I am one of the units in their textbook.
Wow! Yeah, congratulations! That's so cool.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I'm not like a huge unit, but I'm like a sidebar, and like there's a multimedia piece and all that. And so they were getting me to, I think it's called World Histories. It's World Histories, and it's middle school, and then also there's a high school version, I believe. And people have sent me photos before from like, where have I seen photos? Like Egypt. Somebody from Egypt sent me a photo. Somebody sent me a photo, I think from Australia, of where somewhere in Asia too, where they were like, "Look, you're in my kid's book," and they'd sent me a photo, which was so fun.
That's so cool.
I know. So I was doing a little update for them because they recorded an interview with me back in 2016, which was when I won the Emerging Explorer Award with National Geographic, which was amazing. It was a crazy experience. And so, but I was laughing because I was like, "Oh, it's cute, 2016 Genevieve," so obviously 8 years later of experience doing presenting and public speaking and everything. And also, I'd gotten a couple of the dates were now outdated, right? Because back then, the oldest known art was 40,800 years old. That was, the stuff at El Castillo, right? Do you remember when the dots in the hand at El Castillo were the oldest things in the world?
No, because I wasn't in the field at the time. But yes,
you weren't there yet. But yes. So I was like, do you guys want me to update that for you? So we did an update, which was really fun, and it was neat to it was interesting to see my own evolution doing science communication and presenting, and just the fact that, again, 2016 Genevieve did a great job, but I was like, I can see I'm a little more polished now, like just the extra years of practice, right? And how do I say things smoothly? How do I know I talk like a freight train on here, so apologies, viewers, but I do know how to slow down and speak slowly when I'm supposed to, right? So it was kind of like fire hose approach of Genevieve, but it was neat to kind of do an update and be like, okay, here we go. Now I can make it that little bit more polished. Also, I think lots of people do it, but in particular, women often were a little guilty of going up at the end of sentences. Like we don't believe ourselves. And so I saw myself doing a little bit more of that back then, whereas now I'm better at ending down. Like this is a statement.
This is a statement. It's not a question. I'm telling you something.
I'm not asking for your confirmation. So just all those little things. So it's so funny. That was it was fun. And then also, like I said, such an honor to be involved in that project with National Geographic Learning, and to, again, just evergreen and update a few things for them that were no longer accurate. So got those updated. And I was a little more careful, right? So I kept it more like, the oldest art in the world is older than 60,000 years, because it could change.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So being smarter about not giving exact dates. So that was my fun this week, was doing that. And, again, speaking of science communication, this is where, it's wonderful. It makes me so excited to see paleoanthropology being included, in more and more school material. Because so often history starts with writing, and and so it's really great to see more and more school programs around the world incorporating paleoanthropology and understanding the importance of the deep history of humanity. So I feel like we're having a moment. I feel like we've arrived on the world stage. People are starting to understand, like, oh, I actually know what the Stone Age means now, right? So that we're doing our little part for that. There you go. But that's been my update. So that was what I was up to this week.
Well, that sounds like so much fun and is amazing. And I've had a very intense week, I would say, of just life. But school, things I may have mentioned previously, I'm not sure on the podcast, but things are really lining up finally with grad school and me lining up what I want to do. I know, right? Yay, finally. For those who have been following me in my academic journey, it's been fraught with turmoil, let's say.
But that's life. I'm glad you talk about it, because again, one of the wisest things somebody said to me on my PhD committee right before I started was that, the thing is, graduate school is like where your life catches up to you. And I was like, oh wow. And it's true. I've had children, I've done things like it's and I think that traditionally we put so much emphasis on, you have to go to university at like 18 or 19, and you got to get your degrees and go and then you go start your life. And it's like, it can be more of a journey. And
Yeah,
and
it
and
should be a journey.
that is
Yeah.
okay. And also, if you don't know what you want to do at 18, that is okay. Or if you do one thing and then realize, you know what, I want to do something a little bit different, that is okay. Or if you need to go out into the world and earn money between degrees, that is okay too. Like,
Yeah,
it's,
exactly.
and so I think that's where it's good to share that sometimes life gets in the way and makes things take longer. And that so often, though, these end up being the serendipitous side paths that I think maybe help us get where we really meant to go. And sometimes if we're too focused on we just have to get there, and then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, where am I? What am right? Whereas when you get there, you will be so intentional about knowing this is what I want to do and this is where I want to be because you've had time to really think it through. So
Yes.
there we go. There's my
You
little
should be.
positive. Yay, Seth, go Seth.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you. I'm trying. I have grown much more mindful of myself and my journey.
Good. Yes. Yeah.
But so things are finally cinching together a little bit, and it's looking like I might be headed overseas,
Exciting.
interestingly enough. And that is quite exciting. And we'll see what happens. Lots of planning to do, but focusing on Neanderthals, modern humans, and would you all be surprised if, with how much I talked to George and Genevieve, I told you it might have to do with art? They might have
converted you to the dark side.
So we won't get into specifics right now, but it does involve art, Neanderthals, and modern humans, and it might branch off into various side tracks, but we'll see. But yes, so very excited there. Had a very good interview this morning. Thank you. Chat this morning with a professor that went very well. So things are going in a positive direction there. And, speaking of Neanderthals, we were chatting prior to recording, as we often do. Yeah, you guys listen to these podcasts and they're like an hour long, and that's edited down whenever. You don't hear the 3 hours of Genevieve and I chatting before and after. So it's like a whole day. Like when we do a podcast recording, it's a day event.
Oh, we're so inefficient. Like it's just it's a good thing we're our own bosses.
When George is here, I feel like he straightens us out.
He does. That's his job, right?
It's his job, yeah. Right? So he's gonna listen to this episode and he might not let us do this again. But so anyway, back to what we were saying. So Neanderthals, we were talking about them, and there's so much we don't know about Neanderthals.
Oh yeah.
And I have recently, because of the publication of Ludovic Filmack.
Yep.
I'm screwing his name up. I always screw names up, as you guys know. Genevieve will get it right. But so he has his book, Ludovic Filmack, I believe, and it's called The Naked Neanderthal. And then we have that book that describes basically a creature that is not human and is very its own creature, and that we don't know what that is, and there's no way of knowing what that is, but it's not a human, and we should not associate it with human thought processes. And then on the other side of the aisle, you have Kindred by Rebecca Ragg Sykes, and you have Here Are Neanderthals, They Are Us, just in a different environment and in a different period with slightly different factors that led to different outcomes. If we went down that path, we'd end up as Neanderthals, you could say. Like, it just depends on where you went. We were so similar and they were so closely related. And we know from work by ancient DNA researchers that there's been interbreeding. So we know that it's not black and white, cut and sliced, separate species, different than humans. It's a contentious argument.
It's interesting to think about too, hey? Like to try and yeah, like because you get sites like El Cidrón in Spain. Do you know what I'm talking about? With all the cannibalism.
Well, exactly.
And
There's so many.
and that one's kind of dark. Like then
it's very dark. Yeah.
you're like, ugh.
Yeah, you
But
go down the cannibalism route. Yeah.
right? And but also, I mean, it's almost like they were like harvesting them. Like, do you know what I mean? Like this. By the way, for the record, this is Neanderthals eating Neanderthals. So,
Yes.
but it's and you're like, good lord, like it has a weird vibe. But then you remember that there are parts of the world where modern humans have engaged in regular cannibalism for a very long time too. And so I think this is kind of what you and I were talking about was maybe they skewed certain ways more than others, and maybe that's environmental, because I think again there might have been some issues at certain points with genetic bottlenecking, and like they're
Yes,
not
absolutely.
there's not very many of them at points.
Right.
Or,
we know that for a fact. Yeah.
yeah, or the environment gets really tough and there's not a lot of resources, and so actually I was having fun with my 12-year-old son chatting about dietary versus ritual cannibalism, because it's Genevieve's household. Are your neighbors tasty, or are we like recognizing them for either because they're dead we care about? I was like, in certain cultures you'd have to eat me when I died, was what I was telling him.
Right.
And he's like, well, in that context, okay, it makes sense. So I mean, I think like is it more that there is a certain spectrum almost of possibilities as to how these sort of closely related hominids could live, and then which variation of that happens is almost just a combination of all these different factors that are change over time, and then which are things that have impacted our cultures as well in different parts of the world. It comes to like marriage practices, dietary practices, ritual practices, things like that.
I think, and this is straying a little bit from what I want to talk about, so I'm not going to go too far, but people don't recognize how impactful culture is.
Oh,
if you stripped a human being of culture and you just had a plain biological being, it would not. It wouldn't be human.
No.
To me, it wouldn't be human.
No.
And the thing is, every group of people, and by group of people, I mean 5 or more, because that could be a group, a tribe. And we don't like using the word tribe, so I'm trying not to. But a group of people, we say in the United States before Christopher Columbus came, I think there was something like 5,000 indigenous tribes or something.
Yeah.
That's just the United States. And that was just for a certain period. So imagine the world and how many small groups there were, and how many cultures, fully developed cultures, where they had their own complete ways of doing things, knowing things, mythology, ways the world worked. And that was a palette you could just put on this plain biological being. You could swap that out at any moment and you could have a different human.
Yep.
Culture is what makes us, and like it is so important to what makes a human. It's not everything, obviously, because you do need the biological factors.
But the biological, it's almost like, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but I think you're right, which is that we are culture. Like,
yes,
like that is what we, and that is also maybe what it is that culture is how we frame the world. It's how we understand the world, and it's how we interact with the world. And so the biology moves us through the world, but how we move through the world is the culture piece.
And the why.
And why we do the things we do. And so, no, I think you're onto something. And especially now that we're starting to understand that Neanderthals have very sophisticated culture as well, that this is where they're a different variation of us.
Exactly.
And I think that's where I would say it probably lands maybe somewhere in between those two books that you mentioned, like
most likely
Kindred versus, like, it's probably somewhere in there. Like there is some. That's such an interesting question. I think that's the kind of question we're trying to answer, right? I mean, this is why we do what we do. Is that but it's interesting on a philosophical level though too to think about. But I think that's where, and also for so long, all the oldest not even oldest, but all of the art or all of the what I'd call symbolic artifacts. So these are things that are, not just the stone tools, but, necklaces or, engraved stone plaques or things that came out of like archaeological layers that were symbolic in nature or had art or something on them. All of those were assigned to being human. Right? So there's lots of sites where Neanderthals lived there, then humans lived there, and then Neanderthals lived there. Because again, if it's a good cave with, access to water and herds and resources, different groups are going to use it at different times as they pass through. But up until probably the second half of the 20th century, for sure, maybe even later, I would say that most of that stuff was assigned to being human, just by default, and nobody was paying any attention to the Neanderthals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, when you think of how the Neanderthals have been portrayed up until very recently, that makes sense. How could a brute like that make cave art?
Yes.
Now,
we think of art as like the Renaissance and things like that, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Which again, we're using the term art very loosely right now. We are. Extremely loosely.
Graphic mark making is how I usually talk about it, in that large making visual marks, which may or may not be designed for like aesthetic appeal to our modern 21st century eyes.
Right. Now, as someone who has been in these caves, because for those of you who may not know, Genevieve is an active researcher. She actually she did it on her YouTube channel recently. She did a series from In the Field in Jordan. Go watch it. It's really fun and awesome. So go watch that. But so she's an active researcher. She goes into these caves, crawling through them, things I hope to do at some point. But
yes, you're almost there.
So, I know, I'll be a little snooty right now. I know there's things that that I know that that I know that we can't talk about.
Yes, there are some.
But why is it, do you think, with all of this potential information out there and ideas out there about Neanderthals, that there is a lack of publishing and or focus publicly, because it seems that it's not being done, on sites that were potentially, like you mentioned, occupied by Neanderthals before or at the same time as modern humans? Why? It seems like there's a gap. Like, people don't want to look at the art. They don't.
Oh, I think, though, honestly, at this point, I think the interest is there. I think the open-mindedness is mostly there. The big problem, honestly, and we were talking about this a little bit even before, but I'll elaborate now, is yes, there's a few exciting things in the works that I can't quite talk about yet because they're not published. But the big problem with this is that there's not that many of us in the field. Like, I've mentioned that a couple times, but maybe this is a good time to like really reinforce that, which is that, like, all of my colleagues are flat out busy with like way too many projects they're trying to do. And yet there is material sitting at museums across Europe that have never been studied beyond the initial inventorying when they were excavated. And I mean, I have a list
100 years ago.
Yes, and it could be 100 years ago. And so this is the problem, is that and part of it was just that people weren't paying attention, or like, oh, these stone beads didn't seem that interesting at the time. Oh, there's more beads, they're human, but they're not noticing, or especially it was before carbon dating. And so maybe now we're realizing, like, oh wow, that thing's 70,000, that's from a 70,000-year-old layer. There was no humans here then. It must be Neanderthal. So one example is like, I'm thinking about sites like La Ferricie in France, or Archaeology. So Archaeology has like a necklace. It's from what's called the Chalopuronian. It was one of the first things where they were like, oh, we think Neanderthals made this necklace, not modern humans. And but there's material sitting all over the place. With my colleagues would love to share it. Like, it's not even like I have invitations to go places and study things. Like there's a whole lot of material which has been excavated where it's very solid Neanderthal layers. Like, so again, these there's Neanderthal tools were found around it, Neanderthal material, like these are Neanderthal sites. And there's stuff in there that needs to be analyzed and recorded and, written up, but there's not enough people to do it. And so I think this is where I'm excited to see. I'm really glad that you're coming to the dark side and joining us over here. But truly to the audience to understand that would you not agree now that you're starting to kind of get into our side of the world? Like we know all of each other. Like it's small.
It's a small team. It's a small team.
It's a small, and even all around the world, like we all know each other because there's really not that many people studying Stone Age or Pleistocene art. And so it's not that there's not will or interest even at this point. I think, and again, we have a few grumpy Gusses who maybe don't want to join the Team Neanderthal. But at this point, it's more just nobody has time. And so there's lots of interest. But yeah, I have one friend and colleague who, for her PhD, I mean, she was literally in the back of one of the museums, and she was just pulling, like there was boxes and boxes of material from a site where, again, it was like Neanderthals and humans that lived there, and that was excavated, I think, back in the 50s, and so it was never separated off. And so she started doing that, and man, did she start finding some interesting stuff. That's all I can say because it's not published, but it's there. It's there. And I mean, even with modern human stuff, I mean, I've been in museums across Europe where there are portable artifacts with geometric markings on them, which made my eyes get huge because I was like, oh my gosh, I have seen those on cave walls. It's not documented anywhere yet. And so this is where, until there's more people and until all that back inventorying almost is done, and then of course there's all the new sites that are coming out, so there's a lot of work still waiting to be done, and to me that's the biggest thing. And so this is where hooray, I've definitely got some museums and other directions I can nudge you in if you're interested for your for your graduate school. But in the long run, I would love to see, and this is where with my vision for my database, which started out as just being for the geometric signs, but from cave art in Europe, in the long run, that's what we need to do, is we need to create a discipline-wide resource where we're doing all the 3D scanning and getting all these artifacts in and getting everything into one location.
Yes.
And we have the technology. You could make it an AI integrated database, which would just enrich it enormously. So this is where I've been working on kind of architecting what that might look like. But that will hopefully be a bit of a game changer, because then in my longer term vision would be to be able to start actually funding grad students to be able to go and do that scanning at the museums, and start to, and then it can all be digitized and incorporated into a single resource, so everybody has access to it, and not even just in the field. I'd like to see citizen scientists of the world have access to it too. So but the step one is somebody's got to go physically do something with it, because it's there. And so I think part of it's is that back in the day, they just everything was just labeled human by default, and we just haven't had enough people. And I know with certain sites where they've started to go back and look, and they're like, oh wow, look at all these things we missed, or oh, this is definitely from a Neanderthal layer, and this is definitely associated with Neanderthals. So there's a lot more. There's a lot of portable pieces of Neanderthal stuff that I've seen with lots of sets of linear marks and lines and other configurations, with engraved cupils on them. So there's stuff that I think that you could start to line up with the walls maybe as well, even to start creating, sort of a much better sense. Because at this point, we don't even have, in the long run, I might be doing a talk about this fairly soon, actually at one of the universities over in Spain, looking at, should we be talking about a Neanderthal art movement? Right? With their own culture and their own style, because that's something we haven't even got into yet, which is that kind of if you go to Australia, the first people there's all those different styles from all the different periods, right? You've got your X-ray style and the Bradshaw style, and so all these different styles. In Europe, we've got all these different styles. Well, nobody's figured out yet what's going on with, but Neanderthals also had a certain set of images that they drew upon to make their marks on the walls. And that would have come from, again, going back to culture, that would have been embedded in marks that were culturally important to them and had significance, right? And so at this point, we don't even have an inventory of what those are. And so, I mean, that's literally where we're starting. So, hint, hint, you're looking for graduate school stuff. but I think that's where, yeah, it's a very open field with a huge amount of possibility, and all of the new technology and dating techniques and artificial intelligence, predictive modeling stuff you could bring into it now. I think we're at a point where we could do some pretty amazing projects if we could just get the manpower, pardon me, human power, to be able to do that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'll stop there. I can keep rambling, but there you go. Stepping off my what is it? My soapbox now. But there you go.
I think we will move to our next topic now.
Let's do it. Oh yeah. That's why I stopped talking.
Because we could go on literally about Neanderthals forever. So you brought to me an interesting story that is one of those stories that fuels the anti-out of Africa fire.
Mm-hmm.
And that is for reasons that I don't think should occur. And I think that's a failure on science communication's part, and I'll explain why. So the article, you want to explain your article, and then I'll talk about why I think that?
Sure. Mostly because I want to try saying this word out loud that I've never said out loud before.
See, I remember when we went through that with pareidolia. I remember that whole episode. I remember it vaguely. I mean,
oh, that was so
vividly.
funny. But it happens. So listeners / viewers, yes, even us. I mean, we do run up against words where I'm like, I've read that word quite a few times. I have never tried to say it out loud before, and now I'm going to do it. Now I'm going to do it live on air, basically. So we'll just give it our best shot. But again, this is outside my area, but I'm just always intrigued about how it changes, as you said, sort of like that bigger picture of our understanding of the very deep history. So this is a story about a new hominid species. We can talk about that in a second too. Called Baronius Manfred Schmidtii. How did I do? Was that okay?
I don't know.
Manfred Schmidtii, something like that. So Baronius Manfred Schmidtii.
I don't know.
See, now you're giving it a shot too. Yes, I mean, I know how to roughly sort of give it that Latinization. So I think it would be something like that. Little hominid from the late Miocene. So we're talking around 11 million years ago. So a long time ago, back geological time here. But it is, again, I don't think, and this is where it's fun, we don't think of hominids being in Europe. And this one was found in Germany, hence the Manfred part of the Manfred Schmidt part of the name. So this was found in Germany. And so not only is this really interesting, because I mean, we know about Gigantopithecus, of course, which was the enormous, like, orangutan-like hominid who always, I think, I'm so impressed by that one, but other than that, I don't think of there being hominids floating around the planet. And so, again, hominids in the large sense, so that's more like, correct me if I'm wrong, Seth, this is more you than me, but like, this is gorillas, chimps, bonobos, orangutans, us, and then relations within that larger family group, right? That's what we're talking about?
So, just to clarify.
Please do.
Yes, because it is a point. First of all, it is very fair that you may not know, because this term has been changed, tossed around, reverted. Depending on who you ask and what generation they're from, they will give you a different definition. The current running definition of hominid versus hominin is a hominid is basically everyone in the hominidae family. It's a family. It be
fair to call it like it's the great apes? Like it's the apes piece of the family? Would that?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yes,
Okay.
it's when you're including the apes and ape ancestors.
Got it.
That's the important part. Ape
Yes,
ancestors as
yes.
well.
Okay, perfect.
And humans and our cousins, like the Australopithecines, or no, they're not our cousins, they're our ancestors.
Yeah, but yeah,
And our
the
ancestors.
net
yes.
is broad. It's
The whole,
hominids,
it's
is
everyone.
everybody, and also our common ancestors, even with like the gorillas and the chimps and us, and so these are even pre-split hominids then as well. So this is what we're
Exactly.
got. Okay, so that's good.
Yeah,
And then
so
hominin, my understanding.
hominins
Yep. Tell me if I'm right. Let's see if I'm correct. You
is
go each way.
only us, as in Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
And our direct ancestors in the hominin, I'm getting okay.
Yeah.
Australopithecines, Australopithecines, and why am I blanking on the
Like
Ardipithecus? What's
Paranthropus?
Yes, Paranthropus, Australopithecus.
Yeah.
Those are hominids and humans. Chimps, gorillas, no. Those are hominids.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
no apes in the hominin family
Got it.
tree.
So
but
that's
there's
kind
our
of like
ancestors.
got it. So it's like post split from like after split with the chimps. Then you're getting
Yes.
into the hominin branch of the family, and that is the
Which-
tighter group of many of them made tools, or they were starting to do things a bit differently. And this was really when the split started to happen between us and the rest of the ape family.
A big, it's not a complete requirement, but a big part of it is bipedalism. So that's part of it.
Okay,
Because
that's part of the checklist.
Right in that split, we kind of see where that starts to arise.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And just for a little factoid, the newest dates are showing that split occurred about 10 million years ago. It used to be 7 million years ago, but new dates have pushed that back. And I just took a class where they told me this, so it's a very updated
That is
date.
really new.
Yeah,
because
about
5 years
10 million
ago.
years ago.
Yeah,
Mhm.
5 years ago it was still 7 million. So see what this crazy field we're in. Isn't that fun? But okay, no, I'm glad. I wanted to clarify that because I figured, I mean, and I mostly had it right, so hooray. But you know, this is where, and I'm in the field now. Again, it's a different sub branch than where I usually hang out. I don't normally slum with the paleontologists over there. Much love to all my paleontology friends. But yeah, like more on that bioant side of things. But it's still it's important and interesting to think about. And with this one, the story that caught my attention was it's a hominid, because even in that sense, I don't think of there being apes in Europe, right? Like other than knowing that orangutans are hanging out over in like, you know, sort of that Indonesian kind of area. I don't think of there's being apes really anywhere outside of Africa. And so to know that there was these ancestral apes floating around, and then in this site, there was 2 species living near each other. And that was the thing that made it extra interesting, was that they were doing different things. And this one, I believe, is really small, right? Like this is a very small hominid, which is unusual.
That's actually the highlight of this article. It is the smallest hominid.
So smallest. There we go.
Yes,
wow.
It is the smallest hominid on record. So that is a very key feature of, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this species. But
let's call it Baronius. The other thing I noticed too, so because they were talking about how apes generally are, a lot of them seem to be frugivores in a broad sense. So frugivore is like focused on a lot of fruit eating, basically.
Yes.
And Baronius, though, was more of a, this is another word I was excited to try saying it out loud for, you know, almost the first time. Folivorous. So that means they're eating foliage like leaves, right? That's what folivorous means? Okay. Me? Am I scored points
so. If I'm remembering my primatology class correctly.
See? Like my primatology teacher would be proud.
Foliage. So yes.
Foliage, yeah. Okay. So it sounds so like to think that not even was it rare, but it may have been more common for there to be hominids floating around different continents. And it makes sense because the environment would have obviously been really different back then. Is this the same time period where we have things like there's like hippos floating around up in Europe too. And is this during that? Because I know
So
it
I
used to
am
be a lot
not
warmer.
right. Right. So I'm no paleoecologist or environmentalist. So I don't want to say things that I might misspeak on. So please, anything I say past this point, verify on your own.
Yeah, totally.
On your own. But one thing that I can say factually is Europe was a very different place than we see today.
Yeah.
Very, very different than we see today. And I did write a piece on this a few years ago, and it was called Planet of the Apes.
Ooh.
And it's because at one point, I believe between 10 to 20 million years ago,
okay,
the old world, as we used to call it, we don't really use that term anymore, but the old world was actually filled with apes. It was forested. There's an answer. I actually remember now. Europe was forested. It was extremely forested.
Yeah.
And there were many ape species. There was Oreopithecus, Graciopithecus, Oranopithecus, and all of these could have led down eventually to what started the hominid line, but we don't know where those links are. But where I get contentious when people come up and say, oh, well, there were apes in Europe, so we didn't come from Africa, we came from Europe.
Yeah.
Well, no, because if you're going to go with that, how far back are we going?
Yeah.
We're not talking 20 million years ago. We're talking about our ancestors who up to 7 million years ago were in Africa.
Yeah. Well, and also this is pre-split from chimps. Like we're like at this point, like it would be a different species, it would be very different. Like probably to the point where we would not, like if you look at an orangutan and you look at a chimp, they are very different creatures. Yes, they're both apes, but they are not even remotely similar.
Exactly. These are completely separate species.
Yeah. Versus more like, say, with us and say Neanderthals, where it's more like that grizzly bear to polar bear split. So
exactly.
Right? You're both talking about big bears. They're just slightly different colors and and they live in different environments, right? So, I think that's where this is much deeper time. It's just interesting to me to imagine a world where there are all because I think that's part of the fun of what we do is to picture these different worlds. And then also
picture this.
Yeah.
Picture this. Okay. So some of them were bipedal. We didn't start bipedalism. Like obviously dinosaurs were bipedal, whatever, but like apes, there were some that were bipedal differently than the way that we walk today. Their gait was different. The way their limbs worked, it was different. It was not what we see today. So we don't consider that to be the start of bipedalism because it was different and it disappeared again from the fossil record to reappear later in a different form.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to picture these apes going through the trees bipedally, and they are very different than whatever we see today.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, though, because I've seen chimps walking upright as well, like bipedal. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was obviously something, but as so often with these types of traits, and this is also kind of a good thing to maybe bring up, is that often there's a capacity floating around in the genetics of the species that you could go this way. And it's more that you need a set of circumstances that suddenly makes it, evolutionarily sensible to
a volcano.
Right? Like a volcano. Or, again, I don't know if this is still where it was at, but I remember when I was an undergrad and learning about these kinds of things, they were pointing out that for our ape ancestors who moved out onto, the open plains and the savannas, the capacity to be upright and therefore see over the tall grass could have been really handy with all the things with big teeth and claws that were floating around out there.
You know how we said there aren't that many paleo people?
Yes.
There aren't that many. I could give you a reason for as many paleo people there are for why we're bipedal.
Oh wow!
There's so many reasons. It
tells you how
that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Well, I know
but there's
that too. But also, there's everyone has their own reason for why we're bipedal.
Ooh, oh, is this a thing? See, that's what I mean. We have our stuff in my art field, but okay, so this is your guys' thing. Is everybody's got
another one that's really popular is we could carry fruit.
Oh, I've heard that one. Or carrying the
Another
babies.
One was carrying the baby because they're not going to hold our babies. We don't know when would they stop being able to.
Well, if there was
Yeah,
no
exactly.
fur, right?
What are they
Then
holding on to?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So
interesting.
there's a lot of there's the I don't there's the hypothesis you're mentioning has a name. I can't remember it right now, but it's literally like called the seeing over the grass hypothesis.
Oh, okay.
But
And
then
then the
there's
other one, isn't
yeah,
there the carrying the baby hypothesis? Is a
yeah, there's carrying the
hypothesis, I think.
baby,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
carrying fruit, there's
yeah,
carrying weapons when we thought that we were
yeah,
warlike back then.
yeah,
There's lots of different
yeah.
just
Okay.
walking. I mean, energy
Yeah.
reasons. I mean, there's so many reasons we could have become bipedal.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe different places at different
Yeah,
times, it's skewed in that direction. And when it gave an advantage, right? That's when, and I think that's where people get like survival of the fittest wrong. Survival
yes.
of the fittest is not about who is biggest or strongest or whatever. It's about who has the best dice roll of the genes sometimes. Like if you're somebody who just happens to more easily be able to balance upright, you might be more likely to survive in a situation where that makes sense. It has nothing to do with you being more fit in some
And I'll
sort of
remind,
like,
yeah,
right?
and I'll remind people all you
Yeah.
have to do to be fit is to reproduce.
Yeah.
That's all the fitness is about. It's not about anything else. It's not about anything cultural or social. It's literally about reproduction. If
Yeah.
you make an offspring and die the next day, you were an evolutionary success.
You won. You get a trophy.
Yeah, you
right?
literally
Yeah,
you die
yeah.
and wake up the next day. Here's your trophy.
Yeah, you did it.
Yeah,
So
that's how. So
yeah,
I don't.
I just
Yeah,
figured I'd
people
flag that because I think they misunderstand.
they don't.
And
They use that all the time. Oh,
Yeah.
survival of the fittest. You have to be the bravest, the strongest, and it's like. I'm going. Okay, this might become a 2-episode
Oh my
thing that
gosh.
we split.
Yeah,
honestly,
we may have to, or maybe we have to talk about
but
this at some other point
yeah,
because we should get into it. It's interesting. We should have George though to keep us on track.
it's just real brief. I know, but like real briefly.
Yeah.
In primatology, when you do studies on alpha males and who is actually producing the offspring,
Yeah.
studies show that the males that are not the alpha males are producing just as many, if not more, offspring with the females because the alpha male is so busy defending the females, he's not actually copulating.
That's so funny. He's just exhausted all the time.
Yeah. And the other males are
And
just sneaking in
stressed.
because that's what they'll do. They'll sneak in, do it, and then they'll. What's he going to do? A paternity test?
Right. Well, and that's
Sometimes they know, but
right, and that's even presuming though again because there's also lots of other. Yeah, we should totally do something on this. It'd be interesting. But and then there's all the other groups though, where there's the multi-male, multi-female groups where they're pair bonding. And so there is
yeah,
no alpha. Like maybe there's, and so this is where again there's a completely different hierarchical structure, which has nothing to do with somebody pounding their chest and trying to control like a large group of females. Like that's just very
yeah,
specific. So the variation in all this is wild. And again, you're looking at different species, what's adaptive, what's the environment, like there's so many different things at play that I think that's really, maybe that's the bottom line with this was I thought it was neat because it was the smallest, it was living with another ape at the same time. So once again, it's kind of a cool example of this landscape that would have looked so different and been so much more populated than it is now. I guess almost like chimps and gorillas living in the same environment now, it would have been like that, but in Germany. And then also, yeah, just sort of looking at all the things we don't know, and then we don't even know we don't know until somebody finds a bone
exactly, right?
or a fossil in this case, and says, "Hey, look at that! We have a whole new species." So that was kind of where I wanted to bring that up. Was I just thought it was kind of neat, and I wanted to learn more about it since bioanth is not my background. But I like to learn from
Absolutely.
the show too.
But that is, something to remember about all of this in this field. Everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
We learn new things every day, every week. Something pops up, a new test is created, and now we have to test everything in the museums that have been sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And in 10 years, if we have new tests for things, all of the knowledge that we have now is not worthless, but it's not.
It's not as it's not as useful. How's that? It's not useless.
Yeah, it's not
but
as useful.
No,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. So, I want to leave you all at the end of this episode with the thought of we are at a pretty pivotal point as a species on this planet.
I agree.
There's a lot going on everywhere. What can we do as a species to collectively make our situation better? You don't have to tell anyone, just think about it. I want to leave you with that message.
Oh, I love that.
And I maybe write it in a journal. I don't know. But just think about it. And every day try to make the world a better place. And like and subscribe to this podcast.
I love
All right.
that. So
I will leave you with that.
there you go. And my final thought, I want to throw one last thing in there on the same note, which is that hominids, hominins, Homo sapien, all of our cousins and family, we are incredibly resilient. We're also very resourceful. And I think that sometimes we can get so caught up in the moment because we don't live for very long, we forget that our ancestors have done incredible things and survived amazing stuff and worked together in really incredible ways. I mean, sometimes we're jerks to each other, but overall, humans are pretty awesome, I think. And again, this is also coming from the fact I am 100% a savage optimist. So I'm hopeful for the future, but I think this is the conversations we need to be having, and the things we need to be thinking about is being intentional and being thoughtful and thinking about all the lessons we can learn from the past, which is literally the point of why we do the show.
Exactly. And we just want to spread this message of positivity, education, and the story of us to all of you on the Paleo Post Podcast.
Yay! Always.
All right, guys. Always. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye.